I think they're one of the greatest relational tools ever invented by people, because they can literally take us to other people, but they can also, the journey there can be with somebody, right?
Mr. Pete Stout, thanks for coming on the podcast and hanging out, man. It's so nice to see your face. It's really good.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's been a while, and it's good to reconnect. We've told a few stories together, so I guess we're going to tell a few more.
Yeah, it's wild because every time I see you, it's usually at an event. So it's like, oh, hey, Pete, how's it going here? Oh, hey, Chris, how's it going? Okay, I know you're busy. Okay, see you later. And then we very often don't get to reconnect. So it's nice to be able to sit down and spend a little bit of dedicated time together.
You know, the best of those events, I couldn't agree more. The best of those events for me are always the ones where you have fewer interactions, better interactions. It's kind of like as you grow older, you start to think about fewer things, better things. And I'm finding that's increasingly difficult at Porsche events. But some of my favorite times at some of these events are the moments that are just with a friend sitting on a curb for as long as you get.
How do you get those?
It's tougher. It's becoming tougher. Although, oddly enough, there's been a gift in recent years, and my daughter, who's a total car fanatic and was clearly from age 1.5 on, it was very apparent. And I hadn't pushed this on her. She's kind of given me the gift of my car enthusiasm back, because, getting into the industry, it's really difficult, especially if you pigeonhole as, you do Porsche. Let's say you do Porsche media for a living. It's really easy to get pigeonholed as, all you're focused on and all people think you're focused on is Porsche. But I always love just all cars.
Yeah.
And I've started going to car events with her, and it's great because I'm not really there for work. All of a sudden it's like, there's a Buick GNX. I love those. There's a Stepnose Giulia or Giulia Super TI. I love those. And so I get to get kind of nerd out with her. And it's not as, relationships are new. And so you're not trying to reconnect with as many people. And so there might be a few people, instead of 20 or 30 or however many. And it's been cool. What's also cool is she's her own self-starter. Like, she'll see me get stuck into conversations and she just cruises. And she's old enough now that I feel a little better about that.
How old is she?
She's 12 now.
12. Yeah. I think I'm at 11. And I'm starting to feel this. And I had wanted to talk about fatherhood later, but we can do it now. And I know I have a question to ask you that'll lead into some of the other things, but I'm starting to notice the fork in the road between the small child and I don't know if it's like, I still think there's a sense of wonderment in her as the older kid. The younger kid still has a sense of wonderment. She's 9 and she's still a little girl, and I feel like this 11, I'm starting to see this divergence of this really independent individual coming along and the loss of the naive sense of wonderment. And have you felt that yet? Is it like right at 11, 12, it like really splits and it scares me to death.
We're right in the midst of that. And, but you want that, my wife and I talk about that often. It's like, little girl,
that's what you want.
This little girl was so sweet and so amazing, and the wonderment, and it's not all gone. And, we had some really challenging years in recent years, and a lot of innocence was taken away in some ways, in terms of, or wonderment. I don't know what the right word is, but some challenge with house fire, and due to asbestos exposure, pretty much her whole childhood had to be thrown out, like all the things. And I don't know how your kids are, but our daughter, like most kids I know, is a hoarder. And so, it's all the stuff that's been hoarded, and suddenly you can't keep it. It's been exposed to nasty stuff, toxins, and so we went to Disneyland, after, like a while after, and we don't go all the time. She'd been once or twice, and we weren't going to the bippity boppity boutique this time. It's like those days were done, and how was she going to be at this place? And we ended up going to the Star Wars area, and you could build your own robot. And it was interesting. We were talking after, my wife and I, was just like, in those moments, I saw the little girl again, like the
Right.
little girl. It was like, and it was the first time after the fire that I saw that. And so there's these moments, these these chances, and it's going to happen again and again. And then there's also this other side that's really beautiful. We also talk about, which is there's these moments where you see the adult ahead
Yep.
and
Yep.
these windows into that. And you want that. It's,
It's what you've been working
sometimes,
for this whole time
well, you
is
want them
that
to
person.
launch
And
well,
yeah,
right? I mean, our parents, I mean, I guess the question for you, Chris, is do you want to go back to 7-year-old Chris and be there forever? No,
forever.
we're
No, but
not,
I'd love to spend a few hours there,
there's a great
just
quote.
shirk all my responsibilities and
Well,
go back in the
why do you think we
backyard
like
and
driving sports cars on curvy roads? Why
yeah,
do we like going out on track or an autocross course or whatever that thing is where we go and play? Like we all have that 7 or 8 or 9-year-old still, but there's a thing that's kept me going in recent years in this sort of 8 years so far, 9 year, we're going into our ninth year of 000. And it's these goofy they used to be called Honest Tea, I think. Now they're called, I think, just iced tea. It's same entrepreneur and sold this iced tea company's bottles, and they have these caps, and inside the caps are these quotes, and they really have helped me along in my entrepreneurial journey. And there's one that ships in harbor are safe, but that's not what ships are made for, and that's us too, right? Like we're not kids in harbor, in childhood and on through, let's say our society says 18. Um, we try to protect and grow and help and launch, but they're meant to go to sea, and you've been to sea. You've driven that blue 911 across country. It inspired a story called Take the Car. And, how many variations of this theme can we come up with, whether it's our kids, ourselves,
yeah.
our old Porsches?
How many harbors do we put ourselves in as adults though too?
Mm-hmm.
How many people take the ship out of the harbor and go, "Oh shit,
Yeah,
it's windy out here." And then they back right back into the harbor and and they stay there. I think that's in many ways we all do that as adults. There's you know,
absolutely.
yeah.
Hopefully daily in differing ways, but I don't think that's likely or true for almost anyone.
Yeah.
But 2012, leaving Excellence after 15 years there, that felt like going out to sea. But then when I got out there, I was like, this isn't as choppy as I thought. It's not as different. Still a lot of print
Look
ads.
how
Still,
look how
not
far I
that
can
different.
see. Look how
I can tell you
far I can see.
the last 8 years has felt like choppy seas. The last 8 years, like there's been some amazing days at sea. And then there's been some times where I'm like, what have we done here? And there's another one of those bottle caps that comes to mind. And it was something along the lines of, I'll probably mangle this quote too, because I didn't prepare it, but it was meaningful to me. Is, those who want to see new lands have to be prepared to be away from the shore for a long time. If you want to see new places, you've got to be willing to be away from the shore for a while. And that's also something that put fuel in the tank for me.
How are you doing with that quote outside of work and outside of the business? Are you still trying to adhere to that as much as you can? I find it difficult to untether myself from where I see myself going, with Overcrest or whatever. Like, oh, that's where I want to be. So then you kind of get on that train that's on the rails going to where you think it's going to be, and sometimes you might not see everything that you're wanting to see because you've tethered yourself to that.
So I think it's a great question. I don't have an instant answer, but I would say that kind of untethered on a lot. Like my wife and I went on a lot of adventures in the last year. It's a small family business, so she jumped in. And we stole her away from her team, and she joined the business with Alex and I in 2017. And so like we're all in. So it gets tricky as parents, right? There's times where he's like, hey, we got to stop talking about 000. We got to be doing other things.
Yep.
On the other hand, we also had all coincided with aging parents moving, and we made the crazy, but it actually in the end ended up being right for our family. We decided to move them in with us. We moved houses specifically to make space for my parents to move with us. My mom had very high care needs, and my dad was aging fast. And So we took that chance as a couple. So we started the business with Alex, uh, a print magazine in 2016, already a little crazy. And then starting any business is nuts. And so I tell myself that to make myself feel better. And I've told myself that many times as we were along the way. Then we moved my parents in with us, and then we had a house fire. So you kind of add this all up. And so to your question about how is it being away from the shore, I would say the thing that took a hit was we were very active socially, 20s and 30s, and into our 40s. And then we chose all in on family. Our daughter, my parents, family back east, a lot of stuff going on. It was the season, and then the business. And so friendships have, I wouldn't say they've taken a hit, but they've been a lower priority. And I would say that too was a season. There was a time where I almost felt like friendships were more important than family. And that was I getting that right? Did we have that right? And in recent years, it's been the other way. And I find that those friendships, if they're real friendships and good friendships, you fall right back in.
Sure.
So, but you only
I
get
fear
so
when
much
the
time
kids are
with family.
gone, it's the same thing for me, with the business and stuff. I spend a lot of time with Jake and Jeff and my family, basically, a lot. And we have a community too. And I love spending time with our community and stuff like that. But when it comes from a standpoint of like, I'd like to go hang out with my buddies tonight, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I did that. And I feel like once the kids inevitably leave and go off into their own lives, um, I'm trying to make sure that especially with my wife, and I feel like a lot of people, this is a danger, is you spend so much time on family and business and stuff like that, that you almost lose a little bit of who you are. And it probably becomes, and I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, but you have a sense of rediscovery. I'm waiting for that chapter where I know that I'm going to have to go through this sense of rediscovery with myself, with my wife, and probably develop new relationships and new friendships at, I guess it's going to be 50, 55 years old. I'm going to have to, have another new chapter. And I think that's something that you probably learn over time as you go through life. Is life isn't one long chapter, right? You kind of, when you're young, you see it, you have all these friends, you're like, oh, these are great friends. I can't wait to have these friends for the rest of my life. And you're in this thing and you just think you're going to continue to pull this thread, but it's not. It's just like this, you're just pulling new threads over and over and over again. And they constantly add to this mixture and ingredient list to who you actually are.
Absolutely. And I think about, David E. Davis Jr., and he'd talk about, creating a rich tapestry. And so to your comment about the threads prompts me to that idea and that concept and how that weaves in, or for lack of a better pun, into this idea of seasons. I tend to take all these things in seasons. There's emotional seasons, there's work seasons, there's life seasons. And I think the only change, the only constant is change in this, right? And so I think what you're getting at of being I think it's a youthful thing to say, oh, this is just going to go on. Like I want this to just stay and be the same. Now, of course, there's always the irony and the what's the term I'm looking for here? The I can't think of the words escaping me right now, but there are some things like, some of us are car changers and some of us are car keepers. And so there are these things where we'll like hold on to it.
Some of
And I
us
don't
are
think there's
both with
anything wrong with
massive
that either.
problems and
What's
addiction
that?
habits with cars and parts. I was saying some of us are both. We've got too much stuff.
Yeah.
Too many cars. The drivers, the keepers, the flippers, everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wanna get into a little bit of storytelling and writing philosophy. But I would love to hear the what you think is the best story that you've ever told. You've told a lot of stories. You've written, and I've read many of them, and many of them are very good. So I'm just curious, what is your favorite, or I guess your favorite story and what the best story you're ever told are, might be two different things. But in your mind, what is the best one?
Usually I reach for like to a question like that, and it's tough. It's people you say, oh, what's the best car you've ever driven? I was like, this is complete. Up until 2004 or 5, I was like, that's a completely ridiculous question. Like, best car for what?
Exactly.
And then I had a Carrera GT for a week, and the answers never changed since. The Yellowbird a year later, for a few months, driving a 917K in the wet at Sonoma. At some of the Autobahn
I didn't
stories.
ask what the most terrifying experience you've ever had was. I imagine
Well,
that's
having a helicopter scrambled out of Barcelona to come get us, Chris Harris and Christian Gebhardt and a couple of us on a GT3 launch that wasn't really a GT3 launch with Preuninger. Think about all those various stories
yeah.
I've told. And then there's some of the backstories that haven't been told, and I'm beginning to be able to tell. And I sometimes tell in public spaces or private spaces. But actually, I'm going to go with something. I'm going to take a little inspiration from Ferry Porsche and twist it slightly. Where he said, "What's your favorite car?" And he's like, "The next one." I'm going to tell a story from just yesterday that had meaning for me, and it ties back into family. Yesterday, someone on our 000 team, Larry Lee, our CEO, asked me to come out to Orinda Cars and Coffee for Le Pit Club, and it was actually it was Lafayette and East Bay, so where I'm from, a little further east. And I used to drive my 914 out there in the summer at night with my friends. We'd pile in, 2, 3 people, usually 3 people, somebody sitting in the center seat, and we'd go drive out there from El Cerrito, where I grew up. And the reason we do that is they got hot summer nights and we did not. El Cerrito is just freezing cold. It's next to Berkeley. No one knows where it is really. But if you are from the Bay Area, you can watch the fog go across the Oakland-San Francisco Bay Bridge, get to Berkeley and take a left and cruise along the hills and smother El Cerrito. So it freezes all summer. So we would go out there to Lafayette and Walnut Creek and Black Hawk, and we just wanted to drive. Here we were 16, 17, 18 years old, just driving in this old 4-cylinder 914, which we thought was cool, or maybe very uncool. I'm not sure. My classmates definitely thought it was uncool and voted it hooptiest car my senior year of high school. But we would drive out there. And so I don't get out to that area as much anymore in this season of my life. And Larry wanted me to bring a car out that we did an event for on Saturday night. And that was the 992 Turbo S 000 commission. It's a car that we built with Porsche Sonderwunsch in Germany, their team, and Atlanta, and they rendered sort of this package, this sort of grouping of inside and interior, exterior touches that reference a race car we were involved in. And so we don't want to put too many miles on this car because we're giving it away. It's a sweepstakes car. So I did an event at Club Wheelhouse on Saturday night with the car, and then I drove it out of there home. And then my daughter and I drove to Lafayette the next day. So that was yesterday, Sunday morning. And got out there, and it was your typical cars and coffee, fun, small one. And the pickup tends to be all marks. So there was all kinds of different stuff, hot rods and BMW M3s and really cool Datsun 510 and some Porsches and whatever. So we leave, and I realized that there was a chance to go up over Grizzly Peak, which I think I took you through, up and high in the hills above Berkeley.
I do remember
and that's
that,
where
yeah.
I grew up driving that 914 the most. And so here was my 12-year-old daughter next to me, and we exited Highway 24 and went up tunnel to the top and took a ride on Grizzly Peak. And those curves are just like ingrained, even though I don't drive them as often anymore. And those vistas are very special to me. I think there's some of the most beautiful views of San Francisco in the Bay Area, period. And that place is different now. You can't run the way you used to be able to run. It's covered in bicycles, and it's just a different time now. Those roads are used more to the point that they've closed off all the turnouts that we used to go and park in to look at the insane views. But I was able to park that car up on the wall, which is a spot that used to be only for motorcycles. And if you tried to come in with a 914, you got all kinds of head shaking. Like the wall was like, it was bikes only. And so we did that road. And then I kind of realized, well, it doesn't really add miles. Why don't we just take the Arlington and go through Kensington, take the Arlington through Kensington to El Cerrito and go by my old childhood home. And that's the home we moved my parents out of. So they were there for more than 40 years. And so we were driving along the Arlington, and it just kind of all came back. I remember plying those roads in that old 4-cylinder 914. And here I was driving a brand new 911 Turbo uh, that I'd had a hand in configuring with people that I've gotten to know over the years at the factory, and doing it sitting next to my daughter, who's a car nut. That was not guaranteed. I didn't push that. It's just in the blood or it isn't. And I would have been fine if it wasn't. And so to go by the childhood garage, which is just a few feet above the street level on a very short driveway set into a hill, where I worked on my 914 and this 992 Turbo S, was really pretty wild to start to think about all the stories that have transpired. And my daughter said, Dad, what would your teenage you have said, if you were down here working on your 914 and you saw your adult you drive by in this car? What would you have thought? What's that?
Geez, man, that's heavy. That's
heavy, right?
Yeah.
And so I looked at her, and she's going through her road right now, right? She's on her road, and she's struggling in some of the same places that I did with school. Math and science, tough for me. I've got an engineering brain, and I love technical subjects, but math was never easy for me. And science, not so much either. And so sadly, she's inherited many good things from my wife, and this is one of the bum gifts she apparently has inherited from my genes. She's going to struggle there a bit. And, but a lot of, bam, hit me with a question. And so I looked at her and I said, I don't know what I would have thought, but I probably would have wondered, what do I need to not mess up in order to get there? Like, I would have never been able to conceive of this. Like, could we have conceived of a 992 Turbo S in the early 90s? Probably not. But what a wild thing. I still have that 914. I still drive that same 914 that I wrenched on in the early 90s in that garage. And to go by that garage in this 992 Turbo S 000 commission was a pretty surreal moment. And all the stories that led to yesterday's drive, from sort of 96, 97 forward, when I decided to pick up the pen and write about these cars, or in my case, a MacBook 2E or whatever it was, it had an external hard drive. You turned it on, and it was just, all that showed up was like a floppy disk with a question mark blinking until you pushed the disk in. So
remember having to save manually? Like, you had to save manually.
Totally. I also remember printing out in the college computer lab because I couldn't afford a printer. Nobody had a printer in their dorm room.
Way. No.
So, however many cents a page, I'd go there and I reprinted the first Excellence article I wrote 40 times, probably. Just kept marking it up and refining it because I was so scared that it wouldn't get accepted.
So what's that? Why is that story so, I mean, on the surface value, obviously taking a road trip and revisiting that moment with your kid is very special, but why do you feel like that's the pinnacle of stories for you?
FCP Euro is an online retailer of OE, OEM, genuine aftermarket, and performance parts for European cars. From BMW to Porsche, Volvo, and more, their catalog is a one-stop shop with over 275,000 unique products, including expert-assembled kits to make shopping simpler. Actively building out their Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche catalogs, from current to our favorite classics, including the Mark I Scirocco free ride car, they are working to have every part you need for all of your cars. Plus, every product they sell is backed by a lifetime replacement guarantee, even wear items like wiper blades, brake pads, and oil filters. With the opening of their distribution center in Mesa, Arizona, FCP Euro is now shipping parts from both coasts, serving most of the country in 3 days or less with their free shipping option. We at Overcrest have been working with FCP Euro for years and can vouch for them. They're real people who are passionate about what they do and the cars we love, while making sure to put you, the customer, first. Check them out today at fcpeuro.com and take advantage of free shipping on any order over $49.
I don't know if it's pinnacle of stories. It's kind of like, your question for me is like when people used to ask me, what's your favorite car? Until I drove the Carrera GT, I didn't have the one that was like, okay, this is the story. I think the reason why it stands out for me to share right now is I was filled with emotions yesterday as I was driving these streets with my daughter in this car. And for me, it was a full circle. It was a full circle. Maybe it was for just yesterday, and tomorrow there's going to be a better story. That's part of also the excitement of life.
Sure.
But it's imprinted heavily, and it did so just yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I'm telling that
Fresh.
story. And I didn't plan on sharing the story. So maybe it was kind of a her and my moment yesterday. And I didn't make the decision that I would never tell the story, but I didn't plan on telling the story today.
So when I think of like tying this back into cars a little bit, the struggle I have is always, how are these new cars going to earn it in the way that your 914 did and many 911s did? And we don't know what the stories are yet. And it makes me feel kind of good hearing this story, because in a way it's stories like this that allow that car that you drove to earn it, right? Because otherwise it's like, if no stories are being created that cause these emotional depths and cause nostalgia for your daughter and you'll remember this story forever. Without those stories, it's over, right? That's it. It's over. The cars are not able to earn it without stuff like this happening. And I think it's rewarding to hear that. And I like hearing that, because it gives me hope that some of this new stuff can earn it. Because a lot of times it feels, and maybe more, and it varies per marque and manufacturer, but it feels like the cars are not able to, based on the climate we're in, or maybe it's not even the car's fault. It's just far more difficult for them to earn it.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. I mean, the biggest thing I think for me is you talk about earning it, and the modern cars is, we had a scare before we had a house fire. It was electrical in our case. But before that, we had a scare with a wildfire locally, and we had to evacuate. And my dad was alive then. My mom had passed, and he was 88 or so, 89. And he was so calm. He served in Korean War. He's seen some things, saw his brothers go off to World War II, seen some things. And he was just so calm about getting his stuff together to get out of here. And our daughter, meanwhile, was probably 7 or 8. And she was freaking out initially. And I was like, hey, go do these things. And suddenly she was cool. And so my wife gathered everybody up, the animals, loaded all in the family truckster, and got out of here. And I just stayed back and got one of the cars out of the garage, one of my cars out of the garage, picked something, and I'll circle back to that, and then just spend some time trying to harden what I could, get stuff into the garage that might burn, catch an ember, whatever. And, this is an increasing, as we all know, this is an increasing issue for those of us here in California. And so as I was staying back, I had picked my car, and there was 991 in the garage, new 911. I never thought, like, when I started writing about cars, I'd already made my decision. I remember my mom in tears when I chose to quit my business major and write about cars. She was like, but you'll never make any money. She was so scared, because she was an artist. She was a designer, and she knew
the perils. The
right.
pitfalls that were coming.
Right. And she was like, she was heartbroken when I chose to write about cars. She was like, oh, you'll never make any money. And so I kind of accepted that. I was like, I don't care about that. Like, I want to experience stuff. And this is a way to drive more cars than I'll probably ever be able to afford. That was kind of the thinking going in. It was immature, but it was the thinking going in. And so here was this new 911 that I'd ordered very meticulously, paint to sample, because I always loved Irish green early 911s and 356s.
This is the one I drove. The green car. Yeah.
Yep. And so, freak show spec, no sunroof, paint to sample, every sporting option and PCCB on a base Carrera. You're not going to repeat that. That's a freak show car. But I chose my 914 because it earned it. My view that morning was, or that day when I made the choice, was, to your point, the 914 has earned it. And I looked at the 991. I was like, it hasn't earned it. Like, yeah, it's an unusual spec, but I have 30 plus years of this 914. That's the car. I was wrenching on it when I was 15 years old and drove in it with my brother when I was younger, so I drove out of here in the 914 knowing that the 991 would probably burn, or could burn. And what changed that? So now I'd have a tougher time, Chris, if I was faced with that choice. And I've come up with an alternate and hopefully much smarter plan.
A trailer hitch on the 911.
You got it. But here's what changed it. What changed it was in 2022, I was going to Pikes Peak again, and this time to support David Donner. And I saw my wife and daughter on a couch and said, "Hey, I'm driving to Colorado this summer. Do you want to go?" And our daughter was like, "No," with a kind of a smile. She's like, "No." And then she's like, "Wait, what are you doing there?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go support a race team." And she said, "Yes." And so we drove out of here on a Sunday morning. I think it was Sunday, it might have been a Saturday morning. She was 9 years old, and we got road food, got to get the road food. And it happened to be Father's Day.
Biggest road trip expense, Pete.
Oh, no doubt.
It's like $20 at every gas station. It's unbelievable.
And everybody has their thing. Mine is the Gardetto's special recipe, which is only the rye crisps. I think they're one of the
crisps.
Those are like one of the prize road foods.
You and I are very, very rare in liking those rye crisps. I love those things.
They're so good, and they're like self-contained and not greasy.
Yeah,
and they're just like winter. And you don't have to dig for the rye crisps and the Chex Mix or whatever that stuff is. That is the legit. And critically, they're kind of like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. They're good, but common enough that you're likely to find them at any gas station. Like they're like just common enough, at least out here.
You're not a beef jerky guy? I mean, I go for beef jerky. I like the protein, man. Give me the beef
protein's
jerky.
Good.
The drier, the better.
I don't know if my wife's listening or will listen, because I'll tell you, I'll go you one better on the beef jerky. The European rectangular sausage stuff, the dried sausage in Germany in the gas stations is my ultimate jam. We just don't have it here. And Slim Jims aren't. It's like kind of their Slim Jims, but it's on a different level.
All right,
and I'm sure it's just
listeners in Germany. I require these. I must try them.
I tried to smuggle some in, and I got busted at SFO. Like they weren't having it. I couldn't bring the meat products in. I had them in my shoes. It wasn't going to happen. So,
well, you put them in your sock or what?
No. Like in my shoes in the suitcase.
I thought you were trying to like smuggle them in on your person.
I got
sort of drug dealer.
And once they found my stash of gas station stuff, I was like, they weren't buying it. So, anyways, and of course, gummies. In her case, gummies were certainly a part of that trip. But we went and did that, and then we were gone about 10 days. Coming back, we got stuck by weather and got waylaid. They closed the interstate. We had to go a different way. It was very Chris Cluel, take the car. We ended up staying the night unexpectedly in Steamboat, and then taking a different path. And it was beautiful, 2-lane stuff, like really cool. No dirt roads in the 991, but still special. And coming through Reno, I looked over and she finally fell asleep. She didn't sleep a wink, not one, both ways, until we got to Reno coming back. It's 2 days each way from San Francisco to Colorado Springs. I've done big days. That's too far. Even some like Jeff Swart won't do that in one day. And then you really know it's too much for one day. And so we're coming through Reno and coming into Reno out there in the desert. And I'm looking at this sort of cliff to my left. And I remembered going by it when it was on our right. And I look over and she's asleep for the first time in 10 days. And, I looked over and I was like, we went out. She's ruined for racing because she was on the team and she was doing team stuff. And 9 years old, keeping track.
Sounds expensive.
Of time. It's like, right? Well, especially because we won. So her first time on a race team, we won. And, we won exhibition class and placed second overall.
And I'm sure you guys were super excited and she felt that and absorbed that,
Right. And so I look over and I'm thinking like, what an adventure for a 9-year-old seeing these same cliffs as we're going back west. And I said, and a 49-year-old. And so that in that moment, that car earned it. That moment suddenly, I'd have a very hard time choosing. If you made me choose one right now, for the first time, the 914 has a tougher time now because my memories with my dad and my brother and the 914 and so many of my first drives and my Porsche story and my writing about Porsche stuff all started with that 914, that little car. But now I've had some experiences in this green car with my daughter and with my family and new things being built. It's earned it. it's a keeper. Like the goal with that car is to get to 250,000 miles, and its replacement isn't an or, it's an and, if I'm so lucky.
Yeah. My favorite experiences in my entire life are road trips with my girls one-on-one. I have two, but I think that being one-on-one in the car all day, it is irreplaceable.
It's irreplaceable. My best day at Monterey Car Week last year was driving out of there and spending a night in Bodega Bay, far, far, far to the north. My daughter and I left Car Week and went north of San Francisco for one night during Car Week. And it was like a tonic. It was fantastic. I'd always wanted to do that. I'd always wanted to spend Monterey Car Week on the North Coast, and which is, a long ways. It's like 3-4 hours the wrong direction.
Yep.
But finally got to do that with my daughter, and it was in that car again. And it's just these memories.
I implore people to do this with their kids. It doesn't have to be some like grand drive all the way across the country. Even if you go drive for a few hours and stay somewhere, do something and drive back, just that. And it's great for spouses, and it's great for if you got a good friend. It's such a unique experience, especially today where we very often don't spend any time alone or an extended period of time with another person. And there's other ways to do this too. Like you can go on a backpacking trip or go hiking or whatever. But for us, it's cars. And for most people listening, it probably can be too.
Well, and to have a kid hit you over, brain you with some of their observations is just the best. It's just that new perspective, that fresh perspective, the questions that might be asked, but also the quiet time, like being willing to just rock out to what they want to listen to, which at times can be painful.
It's not always good.
Not always. No, but you know what? It is always good. Like in a sense, because it's like you're hooking them. When our daughter was really young, she went through that phase I think a lot of kids do, where they don't want any loud noise. Doesn't like the windows down at speed. Didn't like loud music. Now, we listen to a lot of the same stuff, so we're stoked. Like she's got great taste in music, and in fact, because of her, I went to the best concert I've ever gone to in San Francisco. And we ended up down in the Mish Pot, as she first called it. But we were 2 rows from the stage for her very first big concert, and it was at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, which is an institution in San Francisco, for Aurora, who she loves and she found through a game called Sky during COVID when everybody was stuck in homes, in their home. I didn't know, I'd never heard of Aurora, but she did a concert for all the people who played that game, and it was ethereal and totally incredible. So I'm not that bummed when she and I are driving, and we're doing rallies now. We're doing more and more stuff with Breakfast Club and Breakout Sesh and some of these things. And I love these days. And we're a little wimpy. Like if it's cold out or wet out, we're taking the 991, not the 914. And I also dig these rallies that aren't forcing people to drive old cars. I think that's another error of the car community. I love old cars, don't get me wrong, but I like the mix. Like Driving While Awesome gets that right, in my opinion. Like I love that. I want to see a 944 out there. I want to see I'd way rather see a 90s SL than endless long hood 911s. No offense, I love the blue car.
Yeah,
but
I
like seeing stuff that I don't see driving, and I like seeing people make memories. And I mean, for me, thanks to my daughter, we went to a Breakfast Club rally. I think it was a Breakfast Club rally event. And in the night, when you're young, your eyesight was super good and you could pick out cop headlights from for days.
Yeah, but it was also easier because the headlights were more identifiable.
Totally. Like those Caprice Classic or Crown Vic headlights, you knew, right?
I knew.
But, as I've gotten a little older, it's a little tougher. I find the headlights aren't as interesting, aren't as unique. There aren't, they aren't the seal beams with a certain kind of orange amber business to clue you in on the geometries. That's true. But now trip on this. Imagine that you see some headlights coming up behind you in the darkness of the morning, and on a car you've never seen in person, and your brain says, is that what I think it is? And so in college, I had a AmeriCorps XR4 Ti, also known as an Xerati.
Yeah.
And I was obsessed with the Cosworth CRRS. And for all the things I've done in the car world, I've spent very little time in the UK and never seen one of those. And I was dumb enough to buy the entire body set except for the big rear wing. I didn't want that. Of course, it all showed up and it had been stolen like 5 times. The bumpers had both been stolen. Like they were like 12 colors, as you sanded.
Yeah.
But I saw in my rearview mirror that morning, I was like, are those the glassy headlights of a Sierra Cosworth in my rearview mirror? And so sure enough, that's what showed up. And, we see the Cosworth Escorts here in California pretty regularly. Those cars, Sun International brought a bunch in, or a certain amount. But I'd never seen one of my dream cars, Cosworth Sierra RS. I just always loved those cars. The other Peter Brock, the Texaco car, like all that stuff lives large in my memory. But you just don't see those. Nobody brought them in that I had seen. And the guy that
arguably
shows up,
cooler than a 911.
Oh, and not many
In
people
some
know
ways.
the rear wing of a Cosworth Sierra. If you look, the hatchback, of course, if you look at it from kind of an overview, above 3/4, it is exactly the rear wing of a 74 Carrera. And the part that goes down for the grille in the 911 is the void in the Cosworth CRS. It is the same wing because it's the same designer. So, I mean, it's just geometries are slightly different, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It's a 911 wing on the back of that Cosworth Sierra. It's just jumbo sized, thinned a little bit, and has a big void where it would normally be the grille. It's the glass. But it turns out, so the guy that brings the thing, it's a left-hand drive, black car, original wheels, stock, original owner, lived in the UK, bought it left-hand drive because he knew he wanted to keep it at his house in south of France. And then his kids convinced him to bring it here to California. And that day a dream came true for me. And then we, followed along on this rally, and I got to not only see it at a friend's barn, but I also got to see the car out in California roads and just kind of follow along. He knew how to shoe it. Like we were going along at a pretty good pace, and he kept those 15-inch tires busy. He wasn't doing anything stupid, but he certainly knew how to drive that car.
So one of the things that you've taught me that has stuck with me since the day you said it is, you probably already know what I'm about to say, which is serve the reader. And I've talked about it on the podcast, unbeknownst to you. And I've passed that mentorship on to others who have asked me about writing. And it's almost turned into, for me, more of it's more than just writing. It's whatever, for example, whatever 000 does is to serve not only the reader, but the people that appreciate what you're doing. And for here, it's serve the viewer or serve the rally goer, or however you want to change whoever you're serving into. Was there a moment where that concept occurred to you, where there was a light that went on and you're like, oh, that's it? I mean, obviously it doesn't have to be a moment, but I'm just wondering if there was, and where that concept came from.
Well, it's kind of two fronts, I think. There was a college professor, Greg Spencer. I ended up adding a second major, which is kind of crazy for a kid who barely got into college. I had to write a letter justifying why they should let me in on my grades. And by senior year, I was like all in. I loved English major, but I also liked comm. And so I ended adding comm studies and communication studies. And it was based on the basis of one class. It was theories of classical rhetoric. And this kind of there were a lot of concepts in that class that I fell in love with. Dorothy Sayers' writings and all sorts of the philosophers. But there's kind of 3 theories of rhetoric. And I wasn't ready to talk about this necessarily on a car podcast, but if we're getting into storytelling, there's kind of the usual view. I forgot whether it's rhetoric A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, or which way it falls, but there's kind of this idea of, and we're talking about classical rhetoric, so it's not PC, right? But there's this idea of that one version is manipulative speech. And there's something that's the worst view of rhetoric, and what people often talk about, oh, this is just rhetoric. And then there's the best view of rhetoric, which is a good man speaking well. someone who knows what they're doing in speech, and they're loving the audience. Like the goal there is to love the audience, it's with goodwill towards those who are there to hear. And that really stuck with me, right? But it probably went away. And when I started writing about cars, my first boss, the first owner of a company that I wrote for was Tom Toldrian at Ross Periodicals. And that's who I submitted my first ever story to a real magazine to. That's the one that I printed out 40 times in the college computer lab. And he was the one who really said, serve the reader. And it was such a remarkable opportunity to work there because you had some really great and gifted people around that place. Jay Lamb, who we all know, went on to start 24 Hours of Lemons. Well, he was my first boss for a summer internship under Tom Toldrian's umbrella. He was then the editor of Sports Car International. He was gone by the time I came back after my senior year of college. But it was Toldrian who said, serve the reader, which was really interesting because he didn't say, got to think about the advertisers, though, because that was a running joke back in the 90s that all the car magazines had sold out. And there was plenty of evidence to suggest a lot of the ones we loved had. And so it was so refreshing and inspiring to work for a publisher who said, serve the reader. Don't worry about the advertiser. And I think there was a mixture there. Back then, it was a lot easier to sell print ads. But I think also he had so many advertisers. He had a good sense of he had a good control in the market. And I don't think that was what drove him, though. I think what drove him was he understood innately that if you're serving the advertiser, you're not only not serving the reader, but you're not serving the advertiser either. There's going to be advertisers who get that, and there's going to be advertisers who don't get that. And he didn't want the advertisers who didn't get that. And in fact, one day an advertiser who didn't get that walked in and started complaining about that an author had written, and I had not edited out, that the amount of body work that was required to make this body kit work. It was a carbon fiber body kit for race cars, and this guy did it for a street car. And so it took a ton of work to make it look right. And the maker of the body kit was really angry and showed up unannounced and was like screaming about, how could you have done this to my body kit? And how could you? And I'm like, dude, it's a race kit. Like, everybody understands this is for race cars. It's on a street car that this guy wants to concours or whatever. And so he left and he went to my boss and he started, and my boss was like, there's the door. If you don't want to advertise, have a nice day. Like we're, this is what the author wrote. We're going to back that up. It wasn't that he didn't listen, right? If the concern had been legit, that'd been one thing, but it wasn't the only time. There were a number of times. And so to work in a place like that, where you could serve the reader, where he said, serve the reader, and he meant it and he backed you, was huge. And so that was where that came from. It was Ross Periodicals that really got me to thinking about serve the reader, tell the truth. It was that, and then Bob Carlson at Porsche, who said, write whatever you want, just make sure you can back it up. And I was like, whoa, PR guy is saying, write whatever you want. Well, what is this? But there's a caveat. Make sure you can back it up, because he had been a journalist and he understood that Porsche customers weren't dumb. In fact, quite intelligent in many cases. And I wouldn't say many cases even, I'd say quite intelligent, discerning. And so, he was write what you want, but make sure you can be, and what he was saying is be professional.
Right. One of the questions I get a lot from young writers, and I'm by no means like a vastly experienced writer, but it's always writer's block is the number one. How do you get past it? And I always use the analogy of a car project, right? I have all these moments where I can't get started. I know the project is there. I know it needs to be done. I know what needs to be done, but I can't for some reason get over the threshold of the garage door, per se. Like, I just can't get myself out there to do it. So what I will tend to do then is I'll come out and I'll work in the garage a little bit. I'll clean the workbench. I'll go over here. I'll clean this up, sweep this, blow the doors out, whatever. And somehow you always find yourself meandering over to the car and working on a small project. And once you work on that small little project on the car, the floodgates open up and pretty soon the thing's done. And that's what happened with my Mercedes, which you can't see, but I'm looking at it right now, is I knew that I had to put this other engine in the car. And I was so daunted by the task that I couldn't bear to start. But once I was out here and once the engine was going in, it was it. It was a mudslide after that. And once I kind of relay that to people, and I think they kind of get the point, which is to get over writer's block, you just have to start writing. What is your methodology for sitting down at the blinking cursor when there's just nothing there and there's no meat and you have to create it all yourself? How do you get there? How do you work through that?
Looking for the best app for navigating your next adventure? Look no further than onX Off-Road. With over 750,000 miles of trails and comprehensive online maps, you can explore without worrying about cell service. The app features trail ratings, detailed information, and a discover tool to help you find trails near you. onX Off-Road also includes public and private land boundaries, so you'll know always where you can legally off-road and camp. Plan trips with ease using their route builder and share your adventure with friends. With features like route tracking, waypoint marking, and real-time updates, you're equipped for any challenge. Start your next adventure with confidence. Try onX Off-Road free for 7 days. Download the app and start exploring today.
It's an interesting. I don't know. I've been asked that question oddly enough. Mainly I'm an editor, right? And there's that old cobbler's shoe situation. And so a lot of my stories, pretty much almost all of them, are written last. The cobbler does his shoes last. And you start to wonder, well, what would the cobbler's shoes look like if the cobbler didn't do their shoes last? But I'll tell you, the cobbler probably wouldn't be in shoes because there would be no sales. So, that's serving the customers. So an editor who writes creative or writes at all really for the book, I can't speak to other ones, but I can say that my stories are almost always written last. And I usually am, you're your own worst critic, of course. That's typical of many of us. And so I viewed it as procrastination. So to hear you're actually giving, you can just keep talking about your path because it makes me feel better about frittering away time while I know the deadline. And it's a dangerous thing to suddenly be in control or doing your own magazine, not working for somebody else who's you're accountable to, because then the chance to procrastinate, you gain new tools, which I'm not going to get into because I've abused them for sure in these last 8 years. You learn just how far you can push the deadline. So my stories have typically been written at the end, and it's tough. And I would say, I think about a couple things. Is at some point it's the time crunch that gets me going. It's not what I would encourage for others by any means. But when you're running a whole book, when you're doing a whole magazine, we call them books. When you're doing a whole book, there's probably pick a number, 60, 160 discrete elements that need attending. And then there's your two pieces, captions and text. And what typically will get me going is I'll work on the hook. So I'll start on that paragraph. I always start with the lead. I always start with the first sentence. I'm looking in my mental space. And sometimes I'll just write that down. Even before I get into my procrastinating, I'll write the first few sentences.
Yeah, that's just that concept that's going to drive the entire piece. That one paragraph, that one intro that can help. And sometimes it's a couple of them. You can write a couple or whatever.
Yeah, but I'll commit that. I'll put it down, and then I'll come back to it when it's time to actually write the rest of the story. And I'll obsess over that first sentence or paragraph or two paragraphs for, I don't want to talk how long, hours potentially. It's what it takes me. And I think about Dashiell Hammett, who wrote The Maltese Falcon, which is really, if you haven't read it, recommend it. It's one of the great sort of crime novel things of San Francisco, kind of our Raymond Chandler in a sense. And The Maltese Falcon holds up. It's a great book. But and it's especially, I fell in love with it when I lived in downtown San Francisco. but it's a great book even now. And there was I don't know if it was in the back of that copy that I had or where I read it, but Hammett talked about there's no such thing as a good writer who's not willing to do the work. And I could always tell when I was editing, like the writers who complained that it was too edited usually hadn't done the work, and they didn't give a crap about the reader. It's not always the case. It's not saying that like perfect editor. There's no perfect writer. There's no perfect editor. Both are trying. If they're doing the work, they're trying to serve the reader. And sometimes you get to loggerheads on some of those things. It can be difficult, right? And so for me, it was always about the work, and it still is about the work. If I'm going to write a story, I'm going to labor over that lead, and I'm probably going to go back to it and back to it and back to it. And I think, well, I'm not spending this many hours on every paragraph, so what is this? But you realize how important it is. It's not just to get the reader in, because that lead and that hook tells the reader, this is the ride you're about to go on. And that's why it's so important. But it also informs you as a writer. It sets your pace. It sets your sense of mystery, your discovery, all those things. You have this chance. So to me, that's a critical part of the writing method, is getting that lead going. And then what I'll typically do, which is also remarkably inefficient, so here I'm outing myself for all my inefficiencies, is then I'll go stream of conscience. Then I'll commit everything down. Now, I have a remarkably bad memory for some things and a remarkably good memory for a lot of useless things.
Oh,
and
that sounds familiar.
I've made a career of writing about useless things in the grand scheme of things, and then trying to find some meaning later. So I'll typically then take the reader for the ride that I was on experientially. It's one of the things I love about your writing. You write experientially. There's lots of different gifts. Like one thing I learned as an editor is every writer has at least one gift to give. Like Bruce Anderson had this extraordinary gift of being able to write about complex subjects and make them understandable for anybody. He was an amazing mentor in that way. You know, I would start editing stuff when I was young, and he'd be like, "You've gotten all these things ruined. Like you've messed up all this stuff." And so that was a crash course. But later in our arc, we would sit down at lunch. He's like, "So tell me what I wrote this month." And what he was saying was, "Yeah, okay, you edit, but you're making it better." And he was the one who made me better as an editor. But I believe we're not here as writers. If we're doing this thing with Porsche or BMW or Mercedes or Overcrest or whatever it is, we're not here for us. Otherwise, we're just parts of the community experiencing this, right? Like we're here to take others where we were privileged to go. So if I did the Carrera GT launch in Gross Dome outside Berlin in the big fighter base, I wasn't there to just enjoy it. I was there to tell that story and put the reader there. You know, serve the reader. How do you serve the reader? You either inform them or you take them for a ride, or maybe both in the high goal. And so I often tried, I think you might remember this, take the first person out where you can.
That was hard, man.
Oh, it is hard.
Really, really hard. I remember the piece, and I said a bunch of times. You know, you just try and do that. You can do it. You can do it. And I think I resubmitted to you like 3 times, but that notion translated into my novel that I wrote. The novel that I wrote has no first person I thought about or this person was thinking. It's almost as if a movie was on mute and you were sitting next to somebody and you had to narrate what you were seeing on the screen to a blind person. Is how I wrote the entire book. And that was almost a challenge to myself. I'm like, I'm going to write the book this way. And I'm going to take this to its ultimate end and do it in almost to a fault, was writing it that way. And it became almost like a narration.
It was, for me, it was something of, well, how do you put the reader in the car? This came out of serve the reader. How do you put the reader in the car? Does the reader care about Pete? No, the reader cares about the car that they came to read about. And a lot of people in the business, I feel like, tend to get that wrong.
Yeah.
We all came for the car. And the beauty of that is it unites us. You know, cars, I think they're one of the greatest relational tools ever invented by people, because they can literally take us to other people, but they can also, the journey there can be with somebody, right? And I feel like the stories we write and tell about them can be like that. Now, the other side is there have been some stories since I've had to eat my own words and use first person, because there comes a point where and I know, it becomes tortured to try to avoid using the first
You're like
person.
writing in circles, like, how do I do this?
Totally.
Fuck it.
There it is. And I've had to do that.
Yeah.
So, for me, the really inefficient part comes in with, it's kind of like the lead. By the time I'm done, I'm way over on words. And how that's usually worked for me is I'll write into a layout. It's a luxury I get by being the cobbler. And so I'm writing into a layout, which is its own kind of fun thing in a way, but also a nightmare, because then when you're pages over of text and the layout's locked and the page count's locked because the magazine's going off to the printer, it's a fresh hell that the writers don't deal with. It's like the downside to having the toolbox and getting to make the shoe. And so what I find there, and I've tried to talk with various authors over the time, is write it to whatever length you want. I don't care about word count. I've never been a big word count editor, but find the efficiency. Where I find the economy and the elegance in writing is by writing over. This is just me speaking for me. Writing over and then getting it down. And I'll go line by line and start eliminating words like a Jenga puzzle to get it down to size. And that too as a freelancer, I've written for Road and Track and some others, and I'll do it to myself on purpose. I'll write it how I want to write it. And they do give me a word count, so I know what the box is. And if they don't, I'll still put an arbitrary end on it, and I'll start Jenga-ing it down. Or
you also become in love with your own piece too when they're long and they're completely unrestricted, and you've got 3,800 words and it has to be 2,500. All of a sudden you're like, this is my child. How dare you tell me that they're not perfect? And you just love your story and you love your own writing. And then someone comes along and says, yeah, you got to hack out 1,000 words out of this. Good luck. And eventually you find a way to do it and you cull it down. And I've gone back and read stuff that I wrote a year ago that I knew I had to chop 1,000 words off, that I was super pissed about having to do it. And I go, oh, it's actually a lot better, shorter. I had gone way overboard. It was way too verbose, and almost to the point of one of my faults is I have a tendency to navel gaze a little bit, as you know. So I pulling some of that out makes the piece better, but sometimes you don't see it until hindsight.
Yeah, it's we all have these pitfalls. And I think about one of my writing courses in college, and they talked about don't fall in love with your babies. Like, and I would have another editor read something and they would start doing stuff like, whoa, I love that. And then I realized I'd have to step back and kind of look at it and say, no, actually it's better. Or I would really struggle with something like Eric Gustafson at SCI might have edited something. I go over to Jackie Jure at Bemmer, who was next door to me. Both cherished colleagues. And I really was struggling with what Eric had done to a sidebar for Sports Car International or something. And I had to Jackie, I was like, and she just came back instantly. She's like, it's better. It's better the way he has it. And I was like, all right, I gotta take my lumps too. So no, it is a real thing.
It's definitely how it goes. All right. Tell me about David Donner. I want to hear about this car that you guys are, you have a sweepstakes for this turbo, but there's, I started digging into this last night and this morning. This car has earned it. If we talk about cars that have earned it and whether cars will be able to earn it or not, this car certainly has. So tell me about, David Donner and this car and how just walk me through how this car came to be and why.
Well, this car came to be out of the 2020 race win, which was totally an upset win, unexpected, with a 991 GT2 RS Club Sport, which we decorated as an art car
at
for
Pikes
a photo
Peak.
shoot at Pikes Peak. So, 2020 COVID hits. We had just trademarked Rare Shades, which is an event series we do about Porsche colors, unusual Porsche colors, not paint to sample. And paint to sample is welcome, but it was about anything odd. I want to see the Bahia red car because nobody kept Bahia red. I didn't. I painted over it with a different red. So, we suddenly have this trademark. We got to do something with it. You know, the world's shutting down. We always want to do a story on the GT2 RS Club Sport, but you can't shoot it the way it comes because it comes in white and a sort of carbon fiber color here and there. Because they basically, as far as I know, that was the first or one of the first Porsche race cars where it was designed to be wrapped. Porsche fully anticipated that you would wrap it if you were going to race it. So even if you wanted to leave it white, you were going to have to wrap the bumpers and the hood and maybe the doors.
How did they used to come? Like if you got a
GT3 Cup all white, GT3 Cup all white. You know,
like a Carrera car, like a Carrera Cup car, it's just all white.
Yeah, 964 all white.
Is that paint? Like they just paint it white?
997s
right?
all white. Yeah, I think paint.
Okay.
And then certain cars started showing up with exposed carbon parts, and that's still the case. And so that's Porsche saying, we know you're going to wrap it anyway. We're not going to bother with the paint. We're going to skip that step. So the car is not terribly photogenic that way, at least not in my view. So you have to wrap it. And by the time you have to wrap it, why not do a crazy art project? So we did that, and Pikes Peak happened to be available, and for a photo shoot, you know, because the race had been postponed. And so we thought, the car was in Colorado, as was the owner's 935-19. And we thought, well, what's the most compelling photo location in Colorado? If we're going to try to do a viral cover, if we're going to try to do a wild shoot, like shoot for the moon. Like we're this little crazy magazine, but why don't we shoot for the moon? What could be? And we had some great sponsors on the project in Champion, Porsche, and Michelin USA, and McGuire's, and Chopard. And so Pikes Peak was available. It's like, that's the ultimate place in Colorado. You shoot at Pikes Peak. And so called Larry Chen, said, hey, would you do this with us? And he was like, I'm all in. So we did a road trip out there, and the owner the owner of the cars sent me an email and said, hey, would you be okay? He'd never driven Pikes Peak. And we were going to go up there in his 935-19, all carbon fiber. You know, those come all carbon fiber except for the roof, which is painted gray. Not many people notice the roof is agate. So the A and B pillars, or A and C pillars, are agate gray because that's not carbon. But you don't notice until you really look at it. So one car is all a sort of carbon fiber color, and then there's our crazy art car in all colors, in rare shades. And so the owner doesn't really want to drive his, you know, $2 million 935-19 on a curvy road from 9,000 to 14,000 feet for a photo shoot. And
I volunteer as tribute. I will drive it
right?
very slowly.
Yeah, well, and you know, photo shoots, typically you're not going fast, but most people don't know that. And so he sends me an email. He's like, how do you feel if I hire this guy to drive the 935 for the shoot? And this guy was David Donner, you know, 6-time winner, 3-time king of the mountain. I knew him from an event with Bob Carlson for the Porsche Cayenne, where they put journalists in the cars. Jeff Swart was my driver, like coach for the day in a Cayenne Turbo. So I met David Donner, but didn't really spend time with him. I knew he was royalty at Pikes Peak. There's kind of 3 families, the Unsers, the Dallenbachs, and the Donners. Those are kind of the what some would term royalty for that race. And so I knew of him, and knew of his dynasty, his family's dynasty there, met him for the Cayenne event, but hadn't seen him again since. And here he was on the day that we did the photo shoot. He was very nice, very friendly, very low key, very chill. We did the photo shoot. It was pretty intimidating. I was up on the air jacks. I was driving the GT2 RS Club Sport. And just before they put me down, somebody hits me on the side of the suit and says, oh, by the way, you're on stickers, which is slick, so fresh, they're still on the stickers.
Yeah.
The tire stickers are on the treads. So no heat cycles, no nothing, just slicks. Yeah. And they said, and it could be hailing up there. It was nice and dry in the paddock where we were leaving the area. But, you know, like it could be hailing up there. So you're like, great, I'm on unheat cycled slicks and it could be hailing up top. No pressure. But luckily, it was like God's own living room up there. It was gorgeous. Like we lucked out. Pikes Peak could be anything. It could be hot one spot, snowing another. And it was glorious. It was a glorious day. And the next day was a track day that the owner
had. Do you have any fear, though? I mean, when you're like, I've driven on some pretty mountainous roads, not Pikes Peak, but do you have any fear with driving up there? Some of the open, I mean, you can't see. There's a turn and then just nothing. right?
We
I
know
mean, there's just nothing there.
Winter is, for better or worse, right around the corner. And if you live anywhere where snow and ice are a concern, you better start thinking about your tires. Nokian Tires literally invented the winter tire, and this year they're celebrating the 90th anniversary of that invention. Their flagship Hakkapeliitta tires are engineered with cutting-edge technology, honed on the world's toughest test tracks north of the Arctic Circle in the most extreme of conditions. Advanced innovations, such as the cutting-edge Aramid sidewalls made from the same fibers used in bulletproof vests, deliver extreme durability and come with a pothole protection warranty. If a road hazard damages your tire beyond repair, Nokian will replace it for free. In addition, Nokian offers a 30-day satisfaction guarantee, driving them for a month. And if you're not convinced, you can return your tires for a full refund. Learn more and find your set of studded or non-studded winter tires. Visit nokiantires.com/winter legend.
maybe it's a thing of being, growing up in that 914 in the Bay Area. Maybe it's I don't know. There's one of my mentors, very, very famous race car driver. I won't out him, but very, very famous race car driver, has done it all, done stuff that terrifies me, 200 miles an hour at Le Mans at night. He was one of my consistent driving coaches, and he's been a tremendous teacher over the years. And it was funny because he was out here. Oh no, he did Pikes Peak, and I said, "Oh, how'd you like it? Like, what'd you think?" He's like, "You guys are crazy." He's like, with those, he's like, "I didn't like all the drop offs and the guardrails." I'm thinking, from my side, it's like, wow, but you drove Pikes, you drove Le Mans at what speed at night in the rain and in the fog and all these things, and within a certain lap time window. But I realized in that moment, we're all comfortable with what we're comfortable with. And drop-offs don't scare me because I'm always leaving something on the table. So drop-offs don't bother me a bit. Maybe they should. But actually, I don't like guardrails because I'm like, ooh, I'm going to scratch the fender if anything goes wrong. It's
right before you plummet hundreds of feet. Yes,
of course. I mean, this fender. Is of course, like this is the humor of it, right? This is the irony, or this is the the oxymoronic side of it. Heavy on the moron. But the heights didn't bother me. They don't. You drive some of my favorite roads up here in Northern California. The drop-offs are a real thing, and so you should have already done the calculus of how hard am I pushing? What happens if something goes wrong? What is the likelihood of something going wrong? A tire failure, somebody didn't bolt something together, especially if it was me, like whatever, right? You should have done that thinking. And I had a high degree of confidence in the car. GT2 RS Club Sport, factory built, had not yet been raced. Emery, the tech on the car, Mike, the other tech on the car, awesome. Owner, awesome, takes care of his stuff properly. So I wasn't scared in that way, but I was scared when they said, just before they put me down, and they said that, you're on stickers and it could be hailing. I was scared because California kid isn't used to being sideways on ice so much. So then you say, well, I don't have that down. Like,
sub me in, coach.
Right there, that I probably would have sent you. I took some solace in the idea that a lot of it would be low speed. And there's a great video of this that Larry Chen put up. You'd have to probably Google Larry Chen Pikes Peak road trip part 2 or something. But it's an incredible video that shows this photo shoot and shows how car magazine photo shoots are done, which for me is normally like watching paint dry, but everybody wants to know how it's done. And this is the single best video I've ever seen. It's a ton of editing. What's so cool is Larry shows you the shot being made in the video, and then he shows you the final shot, and then he goes back to showing how the next shot's made, and then he shows you the shot, and then goes back to and it's Larry Chen at his among his best. It's a great video if you care about photography and want to learn how it's done. And that's him serving.
It's good.
Serving the reader. It's a cool video. So that was that day. And the owner, I think, to keep us from going too quick up there, and also as a reward, had set up a track day at Pueblo Motorsport Park the next day, so we could actually go exercise those two cars, the 935-19 and the GT2 RS Club Sport. So the next day we went to just goof off and drive these cars at speed. And here was Donner, and he was leaving at the end of the day, and he said, he had to go to a GT3 Cup race. And I said, hey, are you racing at Pikes Peak this year? And immediately I knew it was a dumb question. I should have known the answer. Like that whole thing of never ask a question you don't know the answer to. And he said, no, he said, besides, I don't have anything cool to drive this year. And I was like, well, what would be cool? And the owner took the bait. The owner said, what would be cool? And Donner put his thumb over his shoulder and said, one of those. And so everyone died laughing because the race was only 4 weeks away. We're on these terrible picnic tables at Pueblo. And then I hear this voice that's mine after everyone's done laughing say, what would that take? Because I saw that, hey, if we get this car to the green flag, that'd be insane for PR. We didn't build it as a race car, but here it was. And I did see it up there. When we were up on the photo show, I was like, people are going to wonder where this car is in a month, because it looks like a race car for Pikes Peak. And
it looks like you're testing.
Right. And so he gave me a number plus tires. And I said, maybe. And so a week went by and we decided to do it. And then that meant Donner only had 3 weeks to prep the car. And then he won. He won Time Attack 1 class, finished third overall, I think it was 1.069 or it was 1.069 second behind the winning open wheeler with a stock GT2 RS Club Sport that he only had 3 weeks to prepare, had never turned a wheel in anger. And he was only a second behind an open wheel Pikes Peak special driven by Clint Bosholtz, who knows the hill well, one of the all-time best drivers up there. And so afterwards I said, and a new Time Attack 1 record on top. So I said to Donner, I said, you want to do this again? And he said, yeah, but let's not do the same thing. I was like, well, what does that mean? He said, let's do something different.
Yeah, he's after a new experience. I would be too. Give me that new blood, that new adrenaline,
Right. So we started talking like, what does that look like in a Porsche? And we thought, well, could we get a street car to go up the hill in less than 10 minutes? It had never been done. A production road car.
Do you know what the closest was? Like the closest ever to that 10 minutes?
Yeah, it was like 1020s. It was like it was 1020s as a Bentley. Reese Millen.
Bentley?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was serious program. And so factory back program, they knew what they were doing. And what kind of got us talking about it was that GT2 RS Club Sport did a 936. I think it's 936.559, but I could be off on the 0.559. So car did a 936 and there was more in the car. Race day, the conditions were tough, which had they not been, Donner would have certainly beat those open wheelers. I don't know that we would have won though, because the conditions were really difficult. And David Donahue went through a section where you couldn't practice it because they connect the sections on race day. You can only practice in sections.
Sure. And
cut a tire. And that was the end for him. So I think had the weather not gone bad the day or two before the race, I think Donahue would have won that year and Donner would have been second. But there's always the what ifs, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about Pikes Peak is there's so many variables. You never really know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Peter Brock said, that's another mentor for me, said that's our Le Mans. I was like, you're crazy. But as he explained why he thought it was our Le Mans, I was like, I think you're right. And weather is one of the great variables, as are little homemade teams, not so much these days. And manufacturers play there too. And so we were definitely a little team assembled in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And that's really a testament to David Donner. He pulled in all the resources of somebody who's done it so many times, more than 25 times by then. So he was able to pull in the right people to help him, a team of 3 to support. And he got that done. So we started to say, okay, that car did a 936 on slicks. Could we get a GT2 RS street car up the hill in less than 10 minutes? So we started talking about that and what that would look like. And could we find somebody who would let us do that to a GT2 RS Club Sport? But part of the idea there was, you drive a long hood 911, 72, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in those days, somebody could conceivably go, somebody could conceivably go and get a new 911S, prepare it for Sebring, run it for Sebring for the 12 hours, make a memory, earn it, and then still drive the car on the street after that. They could make a real memory with this car and keep driving it on the street
When was
later.
the last time that was possible, do you think?
It's a great question. We thought about it. It's like 70. I think the last RSR was the second one, the 74 with the center locks.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're already too far gone for the street again. You can maybe make an argument.
When they say there would be signs if you won the lottery, that's me, man. I am street driving that car. That's
Yeah,
that's me.
Well, for me, it'd be an IROC RSR because it's 5-lug. I think that's center locks are one of the, and that's
I don't need
different.
I don't need a center lock. I don't
then
need that,
or now. Like, it's a whole different discussion, right? But
or maybe a 934 is maybe pushing the envelope too much on the race car driven on the street every day. I don't know if I could convince my wife to go to dinner in that, but
you could also argue 964 RSR, which I've driven on the street, RS38, which of course is the street version, which can be converted to track. So, 993 GT2.
That's less gentleman, like a guy buying a car and taking to the track. That car is so far removed from like what a 911S would have been back in the day, right? It's just so far off the awesome. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think maybe 993 GT2, but pick your point in this arc. If you look at today's 911 race cars, they may as well be prototypes.
Yes.
You're not putting that on the street.
They don't even have paint, Pete.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. So, in light of, and then there's all the legislation that's changed, gotten stricter, all that stuff. So, I looked at that, and Donner looked at that, and we we're kind of thinking, okay, it'd be pretty cool to take a modern 911 street car. And what races are left besides Pikes Peak that are interesting, international, where you can do this with a street car? Go play for a win, or go play for a remarkable outcome. And so we started talking it through, and eventually we decided to talk to a friend at Porsche Cars North America, Frank Wiesman, a little bit. And he said, hey, remember the 992 Turbo S now can be had with this lightweight package. And this was something from Dr. Frank Wallitzer from the 918. He's kind of Dr. 918. He said, everybody seems to forget that the 911 Turbo can be a performance car. It's not only a luxury car. And we're going to do this lightweight package. And so lightweight glass, bucket seats, lightweight carpeting, a bunch of different things, around 60 pounds saved, which doesn't sound like much. But actually, not many people know that current 992 Turbo S isn't that much heavier than a 996 Turbo, which is pretty wild to think about. Porsche does not get enough credit for how light its cars are. Like a 991.2.
Well, considering how much bigger it is, right? It got quite a bit bigger, but it still is not that much heavier. There's only so much you can shave off an apple before there isn't any apple left. Well, so when you get to like the minimum amount of what an apple can be defined at, there's not much left to carve off of there, right?
100%. And not many of us as enthusiasts, we get this idea that the modern 911s are too big or too heavy, or both, really, is what you always hear. They are bigger, no doubt. I mean, I love the compactness of the early cars whenever I'm in one. I love the thin A-pillars in your early 911 and all the way through 993. Like, I love that stuff. Don't get me wrong. But a 991.2 Carrera is a really interesting thing to compare on weight compared to a 964 C2. Turns out they're not far off. They're really close. And in fact, the 991.2 might be lighter than some 964 C2, C4 cars. And it's pretty wild to start to think about that, because look at the size of the wheels, 16s versus 20s, or 19s or 20s. You start to think about all the safety, twin turbo engine,
too. Those tires are enormous.
All this stuff. Yeah. But you look under some of these modern 911s, it's like all the stuff we prize in the early cars, aluminum doors, lids. 356s with aluminum doors and lids are worth how much? Mm-hmm. And that's just normal now. Front fenders, F22, SCRS.
Everything's an RS lightweight now.
Everything is. I mean, they're skinning stuff. You talk to Preuninger, 901.1 GT3 RS launch. He was really proud of this bumper that his team came up with. The rear bumper was PU rim, had a new material where it was two skins over these little, like some sort of balls that were in there, and it saved 1.5 pounds. I was like, well, did you do the front bumper? He's like, oh, it was too late. We had to use the one from the normal GT3. But that's not what he was mad about. What he's mad about is that meant that the 901.2 Carrera would get this technology. And so what he and his team had created for the RS, they could only have it for that RS, and then it goes into everything else. which is how it should be.
Yeah.
But I understood what his frustration was, because it meant he was going to have to work that much harder. And people don't realize how hard they're working to lighten these cars. So as we kind of looked at everything, 992 Turbo S with this lightweight package and extraordinary power and rear steer and hyper intelligent all-wheel drive, we started to say, maybe that's the car. That conversation with Frank got me thinking about, it's a current car. Anybody can go buy one. It's not a story where we're telling a story with a generation old car that you can't go and buy. Like, this feels different. This meets
because
Donner's
how many stories
goal.
can be told? What's left, right? We can't just keep digging and digging and digging. We're not paleontologists.
Right.
We have to come up with there has to be new stories to tell.
That's a critical point too. It's like, if we kill off space exploration, if we kill off the modern performance car, and believe me, I've got my issues with modern performance cars.
Me too.
But it's at some level, I blame Audi for making Lamborghinis reliable. Like, I kind of pine for the days when like Diablos and Countachs were nowhere.
I can't see shit. Good.
Right? Exactly. So they're supposed to be exotics. So, but then there's the counter argument to all of that, right? So we kind of started working on this 992 concept, and long story short, we went on to, we pressed go, and we worked with Champion, Porsche, Edwards Collection, Michelin USA. We had a real opportunity in that we didn't have as many external sponsors. So we did another art wrap, this time signatures, 16-page signatures of the magazine, which was for us a way to communicate what was in 000. And we wrapped the car in an article on the first 911 Turbo, 74 build 930, that Richard Meaden wrote an incredible story about. Because people often get the 930 wrong. They think it's only Lux, but the early ones were homologation cars for the 934 and 935, that whole program. And so the first cars were actually quite light. So Meaden drove one back-to-back with the 73 RS 2.7 and was surprised how light and playful the first 930 was. And so we wrapped this 992 Turbo S in that car, in an article about that car. And we went there with one goal, which was to get under 10 minutes. We almost called the project 959, but we were worried that would leak somehow. And so our only goal was to beat the Bentley and to beat Reese Millen's time.
Did you think you were going to be able to do it realistically?
Petrolbox is a monthly service made specifically for the automotive enthusiast. Each month, they carefully select items including tools, detailing supplies, apparel, garage gear, stickers, and publications to be sent right to your doorstep. It's a curated selection of the latest and greatest gear in the industry. And there's actually 2 different levels of subscription to choose from. The Petrolbox Basic costs less than $20 a month, while the Petrolbox Premium gets you even more gear for $39.95 a month. Check them out at mypetrolbox.com and be sure to use the code OVERCREST at checkout to get $6 off your first month.
No.
Did you?
Well, yes. I mean, of course we did, or we wouldn't have done it. But I mean,
optimism and realism are 2 complete. And there's the car right there. So optimism and realism are 2 completely different things. Did you truly think you were going to be able to do it, or was there doubt that led to a sense of pushing through and trying to make it happen?
I would say we probably thought it was 50-50 going in.
Okay.
We didn't know, but we thought it was worth taking the shot. And so, this time we didn't do it in 4 weeks. We started in 2021, but we couldn't get a car. And I really respected Mitch from Mirage at Champion. He said, I've got, decades long customers, many very good customers. And these cars are hard to get right now. And I can't tell one of them, hey, you can't have one because we're going to go race one. And I really respected that answer, and so we couldn't get
the right answer.
Yeah, it is the right answer. Yeah. It is the right answer. So we couldn't get one for 2021 for that race. And in 2022, we learned that we could get a special allocation through Porsche Motorsport North America. The first program, the president of Porsche Motorsport North America let us know that our first program in 2020 helped them sell at least one GT2 RS Club Sport, which they were having trouble moving. It was such a good car, but it didn't really have anywhere to race. It didn't do that well in SRO, and it didn't really meet any other series. So Pikes Peak was a great place for it to race. And that was, in fact, the first international win for the GT2RS Club Sport was Donner. And so out of that, the president helped us get a special allocation to Champion for 000 to do one of these, our program. So for 2022, we had the allocation. And then one of our readers was kind to say, I want to support this. I'll jump in and I'll buy the car. And, I think we could have done that with Champion, but this was easy, it was cool.
Yeah.
It was a nice path. And then Champion signed on to prepare the car, which was everything, or at least a huge part of it. And so Victor Scanapico, who's a tech I had known at Champion, I think he's one of the best Porsche techs in North America. I got to know him in 2006 or so, 2007, on some of those Champion builds that we covered in Excellence. And so it was this thing about you go along in your road, whatever that road is, right? And things circle back. There's seeds that were planted with you and seeds that were planted by you. And I went to Champion the first time in 99 to drive this 996 they built and photograph it. And I was, not long out of college, 2 years out of college. And I get there and we're all worried about the 996 and water cooled. And is there a future? Like, is it over? How are these going to earn it? And these are these cool? Like, is it okay to like these? Like, I already knew that the 996.134 was really good to drive. I already knew that, but the readers were not so. A lot of them had pitchforks and tar and feathers out. So I fly to Champion.
I'm not pulling that thread. You baited me, but I'm not.
All right. So I think those cars have held up actually. Dynamically, they're really, really good. So, and I knew it then, but there was all kinds of controversy around it. So I fly into Miami, go to Boca Raton. We go shoot this car. It's on the cover of April 2000 issue of Excellence, which I recently revisited this for another story. That's why I know the month. I'm not that freakish. Close, but not quite. So I go there and I'm like, guys, can we drive this somewhere? Like, are there some curvy roads we can go drive on? And I'm like, Pete, it's Florida.
It's Florida.
Here we drive. But I didn't know that. I was 20 something and never been there. And so
5%, it has the least amount of elevation changing curves of any other state. You'd be better off in Oklahoma.
So I learned it. So I asked him, where can we go drive this? And like, Pete, it's Florida. We drive for hours and then we get to the off ramp. Yeah. And so I said to them, I said, well, I can't test this car here. And the story suffered for it. And so they then started shipping cars here to Northern California to test. That's the way Champion does things. And I got to know Victor Scanapico. And so here was Victor building this race car. I'm forgetting a key point. Champion supported our first race car in 2020 just as a sponsor. Yeah. But then they were so into it that they went back to racing. And it was the return of the Champion livery, the famous one that I had grown up reading about with the white cars with the reflective color stripes everywhere. And they did a GT2RS Club Sport. And they went back in 2021 and they won. So now it was 000 had gotten to know Donner and Champion had been supportive. And then we supported them. We sponsored their car in 2021 at a small level, which is why our logo's on the back of that car and a few other spots. And then I called Mitra and said, hey, do you want to combine forces for 2022? Like, we had talked about it for 2021, but we couldn't get a car. And so for 2022, couldn't get an allocation. I think Champion would have bought the car or would have had the car for 2021, but we couldn't get one. And they were focused on their GT2RS Club Sport, which, by the way, is a work of art. It's on display at their dealership in Florida, in Pompano Beach. And I highly recommend checking it out if you're in the area. Like the rear wing, the aero on that car is insane. They got H from Truth in 24, the Audi strategist, in on the program. Like, the car is done the Champion way. It's totally wild. No mirrors. You start looking at all the details. Like, the car's dialed. That level of preparation was going to go into this 992 Turbo S. Now, we were super limited in what we could do. You had to be stock aero, stock brakes, stock suspension. You couldn't even change the wheels. They had to be actual factory wheels. Basically, you couldn't do anything to the engine, couldn't do anything to the transmission. All you were allowed was exhaust, largely due to altitude, ECU tuning. Fuel was
Again,
open.
altitude. Yeah, altitude. Yeah.
Fuel was open, and tires. That's it.
Let me ask you a technical question quick. Well, we just talked about tuning that. This is what I was thinking about is at elevation, and this, I just don't know the answer to this question. When you have a turbo, do you just get absolute? I mean, the turbo, if the wastegate is saying, okay, 1 bar, that's how much boost you get. Obviously, you're getting more. You're maybe getting 2 bar with this thing. 2 bar, does the turbo just spool harder and there's more lag? Do you just get 2 bar no matter what? Or is it like, how does this work?
You've got it's a great question. And I'd love to be on your next podcast where we find the applicable engineer. So, so with that,
I don't know the answer. Don't feel bad.
with that disclaimer, I'll tell you when I don't know something. So I don't know in theory, but I'll tell you what we did talk about. There was a point in the arc of our weekly calls on what to do with this car, what we could prepare. There was a point where a tuner was suggesting we change turbos in the car. And so then there was this whole discussion on whether or not that was legal for us to change turbos. And some were saying
it is part of the exhaust now.
Technically,
it's part of the exhaust manifold. It's built in.
It is exhaust, right? So there was part of our camp was like, it's totally fair game. Like it's part of the exhaust system. We can change it.
Yeah.
But ultimately what we found was there had been some problems with 992 tuning, 992 turbo tuning, and that they'd found that the stock turbos were actually quite good. So, and could supply enough boost for what we needed. They were good. They were reliable, which is key at Pikes Peak. Yeah. You really don't want to go outside the box. Now, a lot of Pikes Peak racers go way outside the box, so they just throw the box away and build a car custom for Pikes Peak. But we were going as production car, and every change we made risked upsetting something else.
Yep.
So we stayed in the box, and ECU tuning, exhaust, tires, fuel. And then safety. You have to do safety. And everybody's like, oh, you got to delete the interior. It's like, well, but you had to put this NASCAR country built cage in that meets Pikes Peak rules, which are quite strict for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So whatever you take out in the carpeting and the airbags and the door cards, whatever you're taking out there, you're more than putting in probably with the cage. But back to your question about turbochargers, one of the big things we talked about was turbo speeds. So it's not just because once you start at 9,000, you go to 14,000 feet. And I loved Renless. There were a bunch of people like, oh, what tune are you running? I want to run that tune. It's like, no, you don't. Like, first of all, you won't be running that fuel, and you definitely won't be running that altitude. Like this was a.
Hey, you at sea level? No,
not even in Denver. Like, we dynoed at Colorado Springs, and I think it's 6,000 feet, and the starting line's 9,000 feet. So final ECU tuning was 6,000 feet, and checks and all that stuff. But then you go up to 9,000. And the issue is, are you even going to make, let's say the turbos will spin the boost, they'll do the boost that you want. It's not so much a wastegate problem, it becomes a turbo speed problem.
Yeah. How many RPMs is that turbo going to? That's my thought, is if the wastegate says it's going to open at 2, will the turbo ever reach there? Can it spin fast enough to create the boost that you're at the ECU is asking for?
And I don't have the answer for you at the highest elevations. I would like to be part of that exploration. I'd like to learn. But I can tell you my favorite rumor of race week. So in practice, we show up. We didn't know how fast the car was going to be really. And the car was finished in time for Donner to get one practice weekend in before race week. And he reported the car was awesome. And so he didn't really want the rear wheel steer. He's old school. Going in, he wasn't so stoked about rear steer from some of his previous experiences. He wanted a very analog car, and we couldn't delete it. And he was pleasantly surprised how well the calibration was. And he found that with the rear steer, because so much happens at the back of a 911, I'm an oddity, or maybe not. I prefer certain 911s without rear steer if it's available. I like the simplicity and purity without it. But other 911s, if they're super complex mechanically, they're quite good with it. It just depends car to car and application to application. Donner was like, I don't want that. Race car. I want this street car to be as race car.
He didn't want a new variable that he had to figure out, is my guess.
But thankfully, the team in Weissach had done such a great job with the calibration on that car that what Donner reported back was he had whole new lines after having raced there 27 times. He had whole new lines that he could attack into certain corners that he didn't know were available until he had rear steer settling the back of
Imagine
that
having
car.
the driving IQ to be able to understand that. I wouldn't probably even be. I could probably tell the difference, but
I
good
bet
Lord,
you
I
would
would.
be able to. I bet you would, Chris. What a lot of I was fortunate on 991.2 launch to be able to test back-to-back fairly similar cars, Carrera and Carrera S, with and without rear steer. And even at my aptitude, which is not Donner's, you could tell going into a high-speed corner that the rear was just better settled. Like on your way in under braking to get ready for that turn, because rear steer it's not just the in phase, out of phase. It's also little toe adjustments and little things, weight transfer. And so Donner was finding, I think you would be able to tell. And so he was learning in real time, like I can attack, I don't have to go over there. I can attack on the way in here. And so suddenly the lump and bump on the way to that hard turn or fast turn he didn't have to worry about the lump or bump anymore. Maybe, it's like he had new choices to make. Maybe cover a distance that's less because he didn't have to go somewhere on the road. So he was finding time because of the rear steer. But my favorite rumor of the week had to do with your question on power. And in the paddock, the rumors began because Donner was only 3 or 4 seconds off of these wild Pikes Peak builds. 991 GT3R with twin turbo engines, driven by Reese Millen. 935-19 was Wart. Both seriously experienced shoes, very, very good drivers up there. The rumor with the 991 or the GT3, the twin turbo car, the E-Motion car. The rumor there was they were changing turbos every night, 10 turbos for race week.
Jeez.
1,500 horsepower is again the rumor, and I don't put too much into rumors, but it was probably well over 1,000 horsepower. And here's Donner in what we affectionately call the orthodontist special, 911 turbo, stock, except for exhaust, ECU, tires, and gas, safety mods, and a few deletes of things that had to be out, like carpeting and airbags. And here's Donner. He's like, you'd have to go back to the timesheets, but in the practice sections, he was 3-4 seconds off these like all-out race cars, and nobody could get it.
And remember, we're talking 10 minutes. So when you're a matter of seconds off,
In a section. In a section.
Okay.
I think he was like, I'd have to go back to the sheets and so don't quote me on this. And here I'm going to quote myself on it, but I think it's like 1.5 seconds in one of the sections and 3 or 4 seconds in another. It's worth going back to look because it's kind of wild when you think about how developed those race cars were and how stock this 992 Turbo S was.
So what is this attributed to?
Great question. So all-wheel drive. Now, not that some of those cars didn't also have all-wheel drive, but the two 911s we're talking about, 2 race 911s are rear drive. All-wheel drive for sure. Now, like Randy Pope's Tesla had all-wheel drive. There were others with all-wheel drive. Huna Pegasus had all-wheel drive, but wasn't going to make it to the green flag, sadly, which we'll possibly come back to later. And I think it's all-wheel drive, really, 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 really good all-wheel drive that started its development in 993 Turbo, made a leap in 996, another leap with PTM in 997 and so forth, right? 991 again, 992 again. Rear steer, definitely. Donner, high compliment. We didn't have the aero that those cars had, nowhere near their downforce, but the rear steer was not an equalizer, but it was definitely a help in terms of stability. Power, the car, those things are fast, but the thing that nobody really talked about, as I left a certain F-bomb out of my description of their speed, the other thing not many people talk about is Pikes Peak is a road. Like when I was fortunate to drive a 997 RSR here at Sonoma, and going by the grandstands, there's a kink on your way as you're going up towards turn 2. You're still flat and you're about to go up the hill. And that kink has never bothered me until I drove a 997 RSR, and all of a sudden it felt like it was a lane and a half wide. It was so tight, right? Well, that GT3R is probably as wide, if not wider, than a 997 RSR. And I was saying, boy, this feels a lane and a half wide, but it's probably 4 or 5 lanes wide. Imagine driving that on a 2-lane road. A lot of people are putting full prototype width cars on a 2-lane road. And I think this 992 Turbo S with no flares, nothing past what it was, a street-sized car on a street was a big advantage. So you kind of put this all together, and people are looking at the times and they're saying, oh, those 000 guys are definitely cheating. They got 1,200 horsepower. That was kind of the rumor. And we loved it because we're like, we don't know exactly. I still don't know exactly where the power was up there, partly because of your question, but we know on the dyno was in the 700s. And we also know definitely wasn't making more than 800 because the PDK transmission breaks. Past 800, and I've seen people on forums say, oh, like that's not true. We're running more than 800. I'm like, yeah, on the street. You're not hill climbing it. And Champion learned the hard way with its GT2 RS Club Sport. It broke a transmission. Romain Dumas just kept turning the boost up, and finally they killed the transmission. They had to replace it overnight. So we know we weren't making more than 800, and we were probably 700s. I don't know what it was making at the peak, but nobody could get their head around how fast this car was, and Donner was in it. And so the car ended up being in the fastest 15 after practice and qualifying, which is insane for a 911 Turbo S street car.
For the orthodontist car, yeah.
Stock suspension, stock brakes, all that stuff. Well, then something changed. We thought maybe we can get under 10. Like, we felt pretty good about it. And predictive, we saw it was possible in the 940s. I don't know if I've quite let that cat out of the bag, but I'm doing it here. And so it was possible. Well, then it rained. It snowed, actually. And
the great equalizer.
Or unequalizer in this case. So my daughter said, "Are you worried, Dad? We saw this little window in the clouds as we were going to our hotel the night before, and there's like a little window in the fog or clouds, and you could see the mountain, and it was just snow. It had been sunny and wonderful all week, perfect conditions." And I looked at her and I said, "Worried? No. Concerned? Yes. We spent all year getting ready for this, and so did everybody else. And there may not be any course tomorrow. There may not be any race, or it could be a short race, which is tough because when they shorten the course, you can't get the time. You don't get a real time. You get a real time, but it's not a full course."
Yeah.
And so we woke up the next morning to good news. Pikes Peak International Hill Climb team had driven trucks up and down the course all night and kept it open against challenges. And that was the good news. The bad news was no way we were getting under 10 minutes in the rain. No way with wet sections were we getting under 10 minutes in fog and all this stuff. So we got up there, and Vic and Donner had all the wheels off. Tom and the crew had all the wheels of our car off, and the car's up on jack stands, almost as if to say, come check it out. Car stock. There's rubber in the suspension. Those are the normal brakes. Those are even the normal turbos, all that stuff. What we didn't count on, or at least I didn't, was the silver lining. And the silver lining was suddenly that all-wheel drive Turbo S was the car to have. All the intelligence of all the engineering. And really the story goes back to not 993 Turbo. It goes back to your car. It goes back to the 65 911. It goes back to 356. Rear weight bias. Nothing puts power down like a 356 or a 911 out of a turn. There's some others, Renault Alpine and whatever, but a rear engine car is big advantage for slow and fast out. And Pikes Peak has all sorts of corners like that, and you're going uphill. And so in the end, Donner went up the hill and was first overall in this orthodontist special. And I was
there.
Overall,
you mean overall?
Overall. He was top of the leaderboard. His first section wasn't as fast as Donahue, I think it was, in a GT2 RS Club Sport. This one pretty heavily evolved with BBI, Brumos liveried. And I thought, oh, we can't do that well. We can do okay, but we're not gonna, I'm starting to get, and then the second section came in, and Donner had opened up a big advantage over the other race cars. And then the third section came in, and it was a big advantage again, or at least an advantage, and so forth. And I've got cell phone pics of those sections because I was just blown away by it. And suddenly we were on top. And in the end, only one car beat him that day. It was a TCS, a Wolf prototype driven by Robin Shute really, really well. To give you an idea how fast Robin Shute and that car are, I believe it turned a 110 at Laguna, which is completely insane, right?
I don't even know what that car is. I'll have to look it up.
It's an open wheel. Front wheels are out. It's a prototype. It's an open wheel car. It's built just for Pikes Peak, at least as he had set it up. Wickedly quick with huge downforce, very lightweight. and Robin's a great driver, and he deserved that win. I think he beat Donner's time by 20 some odd seconds in the rain. But nonetheless, we didn't think we could win our class. We were an exhibition, but we ended up winning the class and finishing second overall with a street car. And that car was driven off the hill. So again, for the 9-year-old on our team.
Yeah, he took it back to his house. All right.
Yeah, like, you got it. You got it.
David, so he drove it back to his house, parked in the garage. So
we did go back. We rented the mountain. The team decided that it's something that we need to know. Like, it was on and off again whether it would happen, and the owner, champion, everybody wanted to know, and everybody made it possible. And we all drove back or flew back. I drove back a second time. I didn't want to fly. I think you inspired that with your Take the Car article, but I decided to drive back to Pikes Peak again, that time on my own. My daughter was at school, and the conditions weren't perfect. Everyone's like, oh, you rented the mountain, you could just do whatever you wanted. We got 2 runs a day because you can't be up there all day. You have to work in the morning, and then you have to be off the hill because it's a park. And there were some things we didn't count on. The sun had changed, and so Donner was getting blinded in a few spots where he needed to be able to see. The course was green because it hadn't been cleaned off by race cars for all week. And then the wildlife was out because they hadn't been scared off. The animals hadn't been scared off by the race cars. And so that came home in Donner's second run. He was a 10:03 on the install. And then he did a 9:57, and Larry Chen was there. He said, I was here when Lamborghini put a Urus up the hill, and they got like a 10:30 something. And he said, and they're popping the champagne, and you guys are all long faces. You just went under 10 minutes. And we're like, because we knew it was faster. But Donner reported that an elk or something like this had come out behind his car when he went by about 140 miles an hour. He saw the elk in his mirror.
Should have been driving a Volvo.
Yeah, and talk about where you start questioning what you're really doing here, right?
Yeah,
it's like, what am I asking this person to do? What are we asking this person to do? But also you realize it's not ours to take away from him. It's his choice.
Yeah.
And we asked him what he wanted to do, and he said, I want to take one more run tomorrow, and that's it. We were also looking at how many tires we had still. We were on Cup 2Rs, Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2Rs, which were critical to the performance of that car. And we only had so many more fresh sets. And so we said, all right, we'll do one more run. And the following day, he turned a 9:53. So in less than ideal conditions. So it was dry, but it was green course and, some fear factors and bad lighting. And if you look at the photo of that car as it went across the line, the 9:53 run, it's got a piece of black racer's tape right under the windshield banner because it's trying to
see.
So he could see. So, that's that story. And that's how we went and did that. That's why we went and did that. And it was deeply satisfying to do something in a modern Porsche 911 street car that, what can you still do? Like, what races are still romantic that you can go and do it with a street car? I would submit.
I hope this inspired. Maybe this will inspire or has inspired more people to do it. You guys are giving someone the opportunity to own this car that has earned it.
Yeah, so that's the second part of the story. Another 000 reader reached out and was building a 992 Turbo S as a daily and wanted to see if we would do an edit like we did with the 718 Spiders. We did a thing called the 000 package for the 718 Spider. 39 cars were sold worldwide. And so Drew Koblitz reached out and he said, hey, I would love it. I met him through he owns one of my favorite Singer builds. It's a car called the Synquenon. And it's just super driver centric, which always is like a drug for me. And so that's the most roof CTR like of the Singer classics for me anyway, or it's one of them. Mulholland is like that too. But Drew's Synquenon, I drove that car in Monterey and I was blown away by how good it was. So Drew wanted to build a 992 Turbo S to kind of go with that similar color, but he wanted to do like a CXX build, exclusive build, Zonderwunsch build that referenced what Donner accomplished in one of these cars. I thought that's kind of interesting. Let's work on it. So we ended up doing we worked with the Zonderwunsch teams in both Atlanta and Zuffenhausen, and we configured a car that references Donner's race car Donner took to a win, and later Pikes Peak, a PPIHC certified course time of 9:53. So we started working on that package, and it effectively takes the stenciled 000 logo that was in the grill in the race car, because it was one of the only places we could put our logo. The livery was so busy. And then it has a similar 000 logo under the rear wing. I always love race cars where you see the like Parmalat or M Power or whatever under the rear wing. I always love that detail on race cars. So the race car had that, and the street car has that. And then it has carmine red mirrors. The race car was carmine red. And Glenn Cordell, who I think you know, did the livery with me. And Glenn was the one that solved the livery. This concept of press sheets and magazine pages on a race car looked terrible until Glenn got involved and put it into CAD.
He's one of the more talented guys I know. He is awesome.
100%. And if you look at the race car, it's got a little signature. It's got my initials, and it's got Glenn's initials next to it up on the roof, because Glenn was the one who took the concept and made it work.
I've known Glenn for over 20 years. I've known Glenn for so long. He is immensely talented, and what a guy.
Oh,
I'm so lucky to know him.
I feel fortunate to have worked with Glenn. We've done all kinds of builds and like DreamWorks stuff in 000 with him. He's been able to take ideas that Alex Pilevsky and I have had and make them visual, which we couldn't do. We could just dream about them. And so with Glenn, as we were rendering the race car livery, at one point, here was this crazy thing. It suddenly looked awesome, but the basis car was carmine red, and the mirrors were still carmine red with nothing on them. And I was like, should we do something with the mirrors? And Glenn kind of leans back on the Zoom call and says, I kind of like them just red. And I was like, yeah, that looks good. Let's just leave them red. So the street cars have carmine red mirror caps no matter what color someone orders. We left the lower caps in body color to make it clear that this was not a mistake. And then there's a little almost carmine red that was a trick. We had to find an approved decal color that would go with carmine red, but there's a little logo on the door that says 100, and it's got the kind of a mountain motif with a little road going up that happens to also look like the S of a 993 C4S, which is the first time I remember this stylized S with Porsche. And then inside the center console lid has 953 embossed with the Pikes Peak course map. I've never seen that embossed anywhere, but it's super cool. I'm more used to the tracks we know as a shape, but to see the Pikes Peak road just go up this center console in 953, and then the dash trim has a really intricate pattern that Glenn came up with that references the livery, the proof stripes, the printing proof stripes that Hemlock, our printer, uses to align these sheets. Glenn took what is very colorful and made it monotone. And then it says, I believe, exhibition class winner and second overall at the 100th Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, next to one block of these markings. And then the next block, it says first production road car to climb Pikes Peak in less than 10 minutes. And so every touch besides those two interior hits is directly lifted from the race car inside and out. And then you're required to get the same wheels as the race car, which were the best wheels technically. Any colors available. The Germans asked, do you want to restrict colors? Because some colors might not look so good with the carmine red mirrors. And Alex and I talked about it because we really restricted colors with the 718 Spiders. One interior color, 4 exterior colors initially. And Alex and I said, let's not. Let's let, it's probably not going to look really good in shark blue or racing yellow or, guards red or Ruby Star Neo. Probably won't work so well with the carmine red mirrors. But, there's some 997 RS 4 liters that people built and painted sample that we don't love with all those graphics, and kind of like the freak show cars. It's kind of cool to let people do what they're going to do. And then that car gets an identity. So we didn't restrict colors. We know of probably about 20 orders in process, but that's some while ago. I don't know where it stands now. I've seen the cars in black, white, silver, Drew's X blue one, There's a Arctic gray car coming, and then the one we're giving away is white.
So tell me about how you're giving it away. That sounds enticing, to say the least.
So we're, as Rare Shades was, as Pikes Peak was, these are efforts to get the word out about 000. We're a little company. We don't have, endless cash to spend on marketing, so we look for ways to do interesting things and tell a story, both in the magazine and in a larger sense. And so the sweepstakes, we looked at that and said, okay, Sarah Lassick, who works with us, and Larry Lee, and we all got together, Rebecca, the whole team got together and said, okay, could we do this? Like, what would it look like to give a car away? And so we came up with a sweepstakes, and all you have to do to enter is go to 000 and pretty much buy anything. And during the sweepstakes period, and you're entered. And of course, there's all sorts of limitations, and you can find all the fine print on the website.
There's rules. Well, I mean, we'll put the link in the show notes if anybody wants to do that. But it'll be there.
It's for me, the most special moment was actually, again, with Larry Chen. I called him and said, we need a charity partner. We're looking at a few things. Any ideas? And he said, well, what about 43i? I said, well, what's 43i? And he said, it's a foundation to honor the life and work of Ken Block and continue that. Now, well, are we cool enough to what's going on with this? Let's go check this out. So we go over there, and I go to 43 Institute, 43i.org, and I click in, they've got a thing that says mission. So I go over there and it's like, what are they about? What are they doing here? And basically, their goal is to further Ken's work in creating pathways for motivated misfits, as he called them, in the areas of people who don't have a natural path to motorsports, action sports, or the visual arts. I thought, okay, we don't do action sports at 000, but we sure care about motorsports, and we sure care about visual arts, and we sure care about making sure there are ways for people who otherwise don't have a path to get there. Like this, it's not only those who are quote unquote born into it. I was kicked out of AP English. By no right should I be an editor. I wouldn't have told you that back when I was trying to help you as a developing writer. But, I was a motivated misfit. I was willing to do the work and learn. And it's on us to create pathways. And Ken got that. And I unfortunately never got to meet Ken. He was a larger than life figure for me too. I was too busy cranking out magazines, but I would see his videos and wow, these are art. And I'd share them with my daughter. I'd even share them with my dad.
Yeah.
And there's
no San Francisco. Kind of like, oh, that guy is so cool. I love to have him on the podcast, but I don't know. I just never felt like I was that. And now I know, after talking to his friends, and I know as some of his friends, that was a big mistake. I should have just asked.
I made the same mistake. I thought, that guy's larger than life, too cool. Yeah. Like he's this monolith. He seemed like a monolith to me as a storyteller. But as a storyteller, as an editor of storytellers, once I saw Gymkhana in San Francisco, as a San Franciscan, you watch that and your jaw drops. There's how in the world did you get the permits? How did you get the permits to do that in a city that isn't exactly friendly to car people? Yeah. And, I watched this thing, and the LA one this stuff's art. And so we started talking with 43i, and I got to meet Brian Scotto. And that's when I realized what a bummer I hadn't gotten to meet Ken. Brian Scotto and I get going, and, we start talking about his 964 Turbo. And I think he's kind of almost expecting at 000 that, we're over here at this ivory tower. It's like, no. I used to read European car and VW and Porsche. And, I was into all the same. And so we got into this A1 jam session, and everybody else in the call was super bugged. Like he and I got into like tectonics and 8-valve versus 16-valve. And, so we, and I'm into Rowell too. So I actually assigned an article at Excellence about Rowell way before it became a thing, quote unquote, because I just loved the story. And so I didn't know that he has the first Rowell that for the US that's still the way it was. It was one of the first two, and it's the only one that's still as it was. And so we started jamming, and I knew I wanted to support 43i, but I also loved the idea because I was there when the Honda Pegasus wasn't running right. And I was watching our car go up the top section. Donner was launch controlling his way out of there, and Ken was coming up the hill, and you could tell it was on 5 cylinders or so. Something was off. And I was in BBI's shop when Batim had to pull the plug on the program that week. And there's something I just really loved about the idea of nobody would have seen 000 and Hoonigans getting together. But that's what cars do. They bring us together.
Yeah.
And so a portion of all proceeds out of this sweepstakes benefits 43i. Will be with them at the Peterson for the opening gala, and then also supporting this Ken Block exhibit that's coming to the Peterson, which I am so excited that they're doing, because if you haven't watched, Climbkhana, Gymkhana, I would recommend starting with San Francisco because I do love where I'm from.
I think you're preaching to the choir here. I bet 90% of the people listening have seen this stuff, and if they haven't, shame on them. It's awesome.
But the LA one with the Mustang is art. It has such a good payoff at the end and a lot of humorous moments. But then also the Ford pickup somewhere in Asia, that's another one that's art. The work there is exceptional, and I love
and difficult to evolve that in a way that doesn't spoil it and still pushes the envelope. I'm assuming it we've talked to Ron and stuff, but yeah, it was very difficult. It was very difficult to do.
Well, you look at what they did, and we were talking earlier about where can you still race a 911 street car that's in an interesting way. Well, you can't do it at Le Mans. You can't hack Le Mans. You're not hacking Daytona or Sebring anymore either. You're not going in as with your street driven 911. And really, when it gets back down to romance, it's like, what's left? Isle of Man TT and Pikes Peak. Like, name some others. Not many more. And Ken figured out a way to hack motorsports. And what he did was he said, well, what are all these sponsors really buying? They want eyeballs. And rather than the full cost of a season, I'm going to build this really cool experience for the end user. He served the reader.
Yeah.
What I was really surprised to learn in sitting down with Brian Scotto and Larry Chen was Hoonigans came out of a print magazine. Hoonigans came out of the magazine 0 to 60. And Ken Block was the first advertiser in on Brian Scotto's project. And that was what got that off the ground with the publisher. And so, you start to see these things and you start to realize that a lot of us have a similar origin story. For Alex, the co-founder of 000 and I, we would get these car magazines as kids and we would just disappear. We had hours ahead of memorizing Honda Accord cubic centimeters and 0 to 60 times and all the stuff that you do when you're a kid. Some it's baseball cards. For us, it was the spec sheet.
And for the future, it's going to be like, I used to watch that YouTube series every day. I would watch the same video over and over again. I would watch that Gymkhana film over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. There's going to be all kinds of various ways for people to have consumed and being inspired by this media.
Mm-hmm. And my view on it is we do a print magazine because that's what we know how to do. And I like the permanence of it. I don't always like the work of it, but I like the permanence of it. But I embrace all these other platforms like this one, podcasting, Instagram, videos. You think about some of the quality of the videos that have come out in recent times. Talk about putting you in the car. I still like reading, though. There was a time where we thought reading was just
something about
gone.
holding it,
but it's so cool because you can't describe
going down that romantic thing is another thread that
you can't describe the sound as much as you try. You can do some justice to it with words, but that's where video audio is huge.
Well, you could always see the Tower of Sauron, but sometimes having it described to you and you can imagine it yourself is better than it would ever be.
Depends. Different tools.
It all depends. Yeah. Well, everybody can go if they want to have a chance to win that car. I'll put the link in the show notes. I think it's awesome. I think the story behind it is incredible. I think what you guys did was incredible, creating a story where that the car earned it, and giving that opportunity to the car and I'm sure Porsche's in love with what you've done. They must be to the moon because it's creating these stories are what creates legacy. And it's really neat.
I don't know. The more I've studied Porsche over the years, the more I've learned that Porsche is it's not small these days, right? So there's all sorts of factions. And, you look at, for me, the 911 that probably was the first one. The Steve McQueen 911 for me was the Yellowbird. That was the car that blew my mind as a kid. 211 miles an hour, Phil Hill, Paul Frere, street drivable, 211 miles an hour. That's completely wild, right? That was the car that put them on the map for me. But I've talked to enough Porsche executives and over the years and friends within Weissach and Zuffenhausen and learned that about half love that car and what Roof does, and about half don't. And Porsche is not a monolith; it's a collection of people, and so there's always differing stories. And most people, myself included, I'm guilty of this too, are focused on the GT cars. It's the motorsport cars or nothing. GT3, GT2, GT4, and so forth. ST, R, whatever. And I love those cars. This was about writing an alternate story, something different, and to remind us that, back in the day before we all got drugged by the GT3s, 96.2 here in the US changed everything for me. And suddenly I wasn't interested in the turbo anymore.
I want to push back on you for a second, though, because you just told me that your green car is the one that's earned it. And that's not a GT car.
I'm really glad you...
And I feel like those stories right there, you're going to have way more of the stories like you told me earlier in that car, just because of the sheer amount of them that are out there.
Oh,
that's the car, man.
I've been preaching this for a while now, and I love you for keying in on that. I'm a firm believer that those of us who hyped the GT3s almost did the community a disservice. And that is because there's an awful lot of people with a GT3 or GT3 Touring in their garage, and they don't drive them, either because of value or the cars are too compromised for daily use. And the 901.2 Carrera, I went on that press launch and I couldn't believe how good it was. And once I learned who was behind the suspension tuning, I understood that the car was shockingly good, only really let down by the basis brakes. And the 3-liter twin turbo engine is a total gem. It's like a 2-liter GTI engine after the 1.8T. So the 1.8T left me dead. I didn't care for the power curve, but the 2-liter T was like, oh, it feels like a normally aspirated engine, but it's got the power of a turbo engine. And that's how that 3-liter twin turbo engine is. But it's bolted into a car that, it's a ball out on the back road. Is it the same peaks as a 997R's 4-liter or an ST or an R? No. But is it still a 911? Yes. And is it still a ball out there? Yes. But the difference is my daughter and I could shift into 7th gear and go 518 miles on a tank of gas at not slow speeds. And I can drive it daily. Yeah. And I don't know who coined the phrase, but the best 911 is the one you've got and the one that you're using. And so
I always boil that down to the best road trip car is the one you're driving.
Oh,
and
without doubt.
I'll boil it down even more as long as you're doing it. But I understand what you're saying. It's so much more accessible to go drive something like that. I have one more question for you, because I know we're getting a little bit long, and this might be a little too esoteric. So I want you to take this however you want. And I think about this a lot because I think as I get older, I'm starting to see time more and more. If you had to write one last story, what would you want it to be about?
The base cars are the best cars, kind of on the heels of what we just talked about. I think about the car that launched everything for me in this career was a 973 914. I think it was a 1.7. No one really knows. We call it the question leader. I've never bothered to find out. I think about the base Boxster my wife and I shared early on. I think about all the basis press cars I've had that were so good. And my Carrera is a quote unquote base Carrera. And I think that the story I'd like to write, and I never have, is how good, how many base cars I've driven have been. There's some of them, not all of them, but some of them really shine, even against cars that are further up the range in their era. And it gets back to what you're saying. It's like, get out and drive, take the car and pick cars that you're going to drive more often, because we all only have so many miles. We just don't know how many miles.
Indeed. Pete, thank you for coming to hang out with me, man. I always enjoy talking to you. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise.
I will see you this summer, I'm sure.
I hope you will. We'll take that old cantankerous car of mine that popped a door stay in the wind last time we were together, and maybe we'll talk about old cars some more.
All right. Sounds good. Take
Thanks
care,
for
buddy.
having me on.
You bet.